the exposure of the brain to high levels of dopamine during a period when it's meant to be going through a normal phase of significant change anyway, has enormous repercussions on those teenagers to a degree that we really don't know what the final endpoint is for those developed brains, because what they're injecting in their brains at these highly sensitive moments in their lives are ideas and concepts. It's such a volume and speed that we've not had time in history to examine the long-term longitudinal effects on those brains. Today, in 2025, the vast majority of young people who are under 40 years old who are dealing with pornography didn't develop the problem of pornography because they were escaping these things. They weren't compensating for something that was deficient in their life, and they weren't sort of pushed into this process because of those external factors. The sheer reality is that they got a phone when they were in their young adolescence. They came across porn sites, they liked what they saw, and then they were hooked. I go around to schools and I educate a lot of young kids on pornography, and I engage with them and I get a lot of feedback. And I see by mid-high school, there is a higher rate of sexual engagement with kids. And when we talk especially to the females, they report back over and over again these pretty traumatic, aggressive sexual experiences with their boyfriends. And many of them have had to experience sexual behaviors which, straight from the porn playbook, which not only traumatic to them, but that often before they've even had their first kiss.
My guest today is Marshall Ballantine Jones. Marshall is the CEO of DigiHealth Publishing and founder of Resist Ministries. He holds a PhD from Sydney University's medicine faculty, where he researched effective education solutions to mitigate the negative effects of adolescent exposure to pornography and social media. Additionally, he holds degrees in political and social thought, economics, business systems, and theology. He is also a sought-after speaker, writer, and consultant. In this episode, expect to learn the role neurology plays in porn addiction and recovery, why porn addiction is so prevalent among young people today, how pornography harms individuals, relationships, and society as a whole, and the most effective science-backed strategies for overcoming porn addiction. Before we dive into the conversation, a friendly reminder: if you would like support in overcoming porn addiction, and if you are looking for a shame-free, mindfulness-inspired, and science-based approach to recovery, please get in touch with me today and sign up for a free discovery call. You can learn more about the programs we run in the Unhooked Academy, and let me tell you that the hardest part of recovery is simply taking that first step. All you have to do is reach out, and we'll help guide you the rest of the way. The links to book a free call are down in the show notes below. And now, without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Marshall Ballantine Jones.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Lipkowitz, and with over 12 years of meditation experience as a mindfulness trainer and coach for high performers, I've become obsessed with helping people break free from compulsive, unhealthy behaviors and addictions and step into a life of true freedom so that they can finally become their best selves and cultivate deeper and lasting fulfillment. I've created Unhooked, the Breaking Porn Addiction podcast, to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to master your mind and optimize your life. This is Unhooked. So hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Unhooked. I'm your host, Jeremy Lipkowitz. Today, joined by Marshall Ballantine Jones. Marshall, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jeremy. Nice to be here.
So, just diving straight in, I'm curious to know, you have quite an interesting background, both a science background, a religious background. What is it that has gotten you interested in this topic of porn addiction and porn recovery?
Yeah, thanks. Well, for me, my story in this sphere started when I was working as a publisher for a religious denomination in Sydney, the Anglican Church there. I was a publisher for an author who was a sexologist, and she wrote a series of books. Her name was Dr. Patricia Wirikern. She wrote a series of books for teenagers and young people on how to navigate sex and the modern sexual culture. And while connected with her, I did interact with the problem of pornography, and I also got involved at the same time with some, I guess, not-for-profit think tank research projects trying to explore how pornography was impacting clergy in different denominations. And from there, I basically was blown away by how widespread the problem of porn was across society. And more, I guess this was the catalyst for my research when I went and did my PhD, there was really a vacuum, an absence of evidence-based solutions for dealing with problematic pornography behaviors, for addictions and compulsions and so forth. So that was about 10 years ago. I was frustrated with that lack of solution for different communities, and so I made inquiries about how to go and find some evidence-based solutions, which led me down the path of doing a PhD with the University of Sydney.
I'm curious, what were some of the things that you were seeing, before, the lack of evidence-based solutions? What were some of the maybe faulty solutions or the things that weren't working that were commonly espoused this is what you need to do?
The standard 10, 12 years ago, the standard response to so I was very much located within the Christian leadership sphere. So they were applying it to their own ranks of leadership and also the congregations of their churches, for which there was massive problems under the hood when you looked at one church to another. The standard response at the time was go to a counselor and get some accountability. They were the two responses. And it was like if you go to a counselor, maybe they might do some CBT or something, and that would somehow be the magic wand that would cure a person of these issues. And so that was really the only availability at the time. And also there was a very primitive awareness in neurology at the time, and the degree at which particularly high dopaminergic activities like masturbating to pornography or other things like excessive social media or computer gaming had in shaping the brain in both beliefs and thinking, feelings and ultimately behaviors, and particularly the intersection with compulsion, hypofrontality, where as many of your audience will know, the functionality of the prefrontal cortex is diminished while your limbic system is hyperactive, and all those sorts of complicated variables in the brain. That was really not talked about. It was unknown. And certainly, I think even to this day, many in the classic therapy professions are not aware of the neurology component of addiction, behavioral addictions, and therefore don't have a very good grasp of the origins of these issues as well as the solutions.
How does understanding the neurology of the addiction change the treatment or the way we should look at it?
I think understanding the neurology, it adds one of the bigger pieces on the board to the problem, and then it gives you a arena to approach some effective treatments. So, of course, people who use pornography will use it for generally pleasure, soothing, escaping, distraction, because, of course, orgasms feel really good, but they also unleash a massive volume of chemicals, right? So the chemicals it's not just dopamine, it's not just endorphins, there's also things like oxytocin and vasopressin, which are very powerful in bonding you to the thing that gave you pleasure. There are shifts and changes in serotonin, for example. There are endocannabinoids, which de-stress you. So spikes in noradrenalines, which of course enhance the memory of the experience. And so there's quite a cocktail of hormones, right? So this is all happening in the brain. And it's good for us to know that. Now, the origins of someone's compulsive behaviors, they could be multiple reasons. They may have been escaping something. So, yeah, I use porn because I'm trying to feel good, but I might be escaping something, and I might be escaping problems in my past, difficulties in my life, frustrations, traumas, and so forth. Now, each of those things may have their own stories and may be complicated and may need some serious unpeeling and treatment and processing with some skillful coaching of a professional therapist to help you understand and deal with them. But look, today in 2025, the vast majority of young people who are under 40 years old who are dealing with pornography didn't develop the problem of pornography because they were escaping these things. They weren't compensating for something that was deficient in their life, and they weren't sort of pushed into this process because of those external factors. The sheer reality is that they got a phone when they were their young adolescents. They came across porn sites, they liked what they saw, and then they were hooked. And so when you're dealing with people who are dealing with this behavior of pornography and, I guess, addiction and compulsion to it, look, these people, they came into this process because they got a phone. They got into a phone, and they had no reason not to look at that stuff. And before they know it, they are using this frequently, and they can't stop using it because it feels so good, and they don't know how to stop whenever there's a small urge.
Yeah. It's one of the things. I was actually listening to a podcast with you recently, and you said something that I felt was so insightful about this, which is, people think that in order to get addicted, you must have had some major trauma in your life or some really intense event pushing you to seek this out. And as you said, these days, due to the accessibility of this and how frictionless it is, that many young men, they get a phone, they find this, because it's everywhere, and it feels good. And of course, they're going to want to do more of what feels good. And you said one thing that really stuck with me. It said they did something that feels good, and they had no reason not to do it, right? It's just like, well, of course, if there's something that makes you feel good and there's no reason not to do it, you're going to just keep doing more of it, and you're going to develop a stronger dependence on it and a stronger relationship with it. As you say, kind of the cocktail of endorphins and all these things that make us attached to these behaviors.
Yeah, that's a lot to be said about the no reason not to do something. To say that there's no reason not to do something, it needs to be examined, because there can be reasons not to do something, and we've got to explore what the implications of that action are. For example, if I'm a user of pornography, I have automatically, in engaging with the media on my phone, entered into a relationship with people who provided that media. That is, the pornographers or the distributors or the websites, right, who are themselves being propped up by the advertising revenue that comes through and the third parties that are on those sites. That gives us a reason to think through the rightness of engaging and supporting those other enterprises. And what about the people involved in the content that I look at? Those people, who are those people? I mean, we can examine, for example, the performers, the standard performers that are in pornography. What's their story? Who are they? Why are they doing that? What do I know about them? And of course, there's millions of porn performers throughout history that are now all located on Pornhub and other places. But we do know through studies that the same story keeps emerging with all these people, that they are vulnerable, abused. These are people who have pretty poor backgrounds, who wouldn't be doing the porn production as we see it willingly unless they felt they had no other choice. And so we could challenge whether or not we want to support an industry that brings vulnerable people into these productions and doesn't examine what was going on, whether they were capable of consenting at the time, whether they were desperate for money, whether they were coming from escaping a situation and were doing porn production because they were desperate right then to get some money.
Yeah.
You see, were they being coerced? So there's questions that we can put to porn use and really challenge the user. We can challenge the user about whether or not that content that they're consuming or participating in is actually a good thing for society or that individual or the people that were used in the production.
Well, I think, just going back to that topic of, when a young boy finds in that, saying, well, there's no reason not to, I think it humanizes it and it provides some space for maybe a more accepting or compassionate understanding of why a young boy might have developed that addiction in the first place. Because, a young boy might not have any knowledge of kind of these deeper reflections of the porn industry and how people are treated. And so from his perspective as a 8-year-old boy, there's no reason not to. It's just, oh, this feels good. And he doesn't know any better, right? But it's only when we start to get more awareness and see a bit more of the subtler ways, part of it is the connections to maybe, sex trafficking and ways it can harm people, but even just the subtler ways it can affect ourselves, our own sense of self-worth or integrity, or even, more mundane things like our concentration and our ability to focus and take joy in simple pleasures. So there are, as you say, many reasons not to, but I think it humanizes it when you can look at why a young man might have developed this in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think we have to remember that for most people, their journey with porn started when they were in primary school, when they were 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. So 11 and a half in Australia is about the standard age that someone first encounters pornography, male and female. So, I mean, that's a story there. I mean, those kids who encounter that can be very traumatic for them. And we know that the pornographers are very, very good at seducing people into using porn. They're trying to reach the young people through social media, especially even through Facebook and Twitter, Instagram. It will find them the moment it suspects that the person is young and male. It will start pushing porn to them. So these kids will very quickly be enticed and lured into using it, and packaged around that will be ideas which suggest to the user, this is fine, this won't harm you, this is good, there's nothing wrong with this, you don't have to deal with the conscience, because I know a lot of young kids do feel very confronted with the content that they're looking at. They don't understand it properly. And then, of course, as they move into junior high school and mid-high school, many of them start to wrestle with an awareness that they don't seem to be able to stop using porn, or they start looking at content which is a lot more confronting and abusing, and it really has a conflict with their conscience. And again, there's a secrecy dimension to young people using porn. There's a certain normalization amongst their friends and their peer groups, which again doesn't give them the space to question whether this is right or wrong. So it's the normalization then carries them further into it with their mates. So there's so many variables around that story of that kid who is exposed for that first time at 8, 9, 10. And I think we need to have compassion for them, because they've got everyone against them and they don't know their right hand from their left. And if their parent or carer is unaware of what they're being exposed to on that phone they gave them in their bedroom at nighttime, right? So the kid's completely alone. It's an awful story for them. And of course, you and I know as adults have been looking into this space for years, we know that the story of those kids as they become adults will be ones who really have personal burdens and struggles with this for years to come, unless they have some sort of circuit breaker that really intrudes on that addictive and compulsive behavior. So their story doesn't end when they're young. It carries through to their adult years and can be accompanied with a lot of deeper social issues for them.
And my understanding is that there's something about the adolescent brain and how it's developing that kind of hardwires that in a different way. And I know that you're kind of an expert on the adolescent brain and how this impacts young people. Can you tell me a little bit about what is it about, young people's brains that makes it extra susceptible to hardwiring these?
Well, sure, the adolescent brain is going through a very rapid state of change. It's getting ready for adult life and is letting go of the childhood life. They call this the period of synaptic pruning, where the childlike thoughts and interests and passions are being discarded in the brain as it starts to adapt ideas and thinking and expectations of an adult brain. And so that very vulnerable period, particularly of 11, 12 through to 15, 16, there's vast change in the brain. And that's why teenagers in that age bracket, males and females, have such an emotional roller coaster period of their life. And we'll all remember how that was for each of us. But add to that these supernormal stimuli, injections from their phones. So, I just point to the Jonathan Haidt Anxious Generation book, which is a great recent resource, which has accumulated some of the evidence that's been revealed from the impact of the mobile phone generation. Is an example which has been backed up by so many other points of research of the exposure of the brain to high levels of dopamine during a period when it's meant to be going through a normal phase of significant change anyway, has enormous repercussions on those teenagers, to a degree that we really don't know what the final endpoint is for those developed brains, because what they're injecting in their brains at these highly sensitive moments in their lives are ideas and concepts. It's such a volume and speed that we've not had time in history to examine the long-term longitudinal effects on those brains. So we can guess that those teenagers are going to be struggling with compulsive behaviors when they're older, more to than what we might have expected throughout other points in history. And we could deduce that will be the case, but we don't know what will be like examining the brains of those kids when they're 30 and 40, 50, because we haven't given us enough time in history to go back and look. We're still at the beginning of the studies of that.
Yeah. What is the research saying about the harms of pornography? It's one thing, I have a subjective experience of how pornography harmed my life and harms my relationships. But I'm curious to know, what does the research say about how it harms people's lives?
I think you could look at it in the three major categories. Porn hurts people who are individually using it. And so we know that a person who individually uses a lot of pornography will find a change within their mind and thinking, their belief about sex, about sexual relations, about sexual and social relations will change, because they'll be shaped by the content that the user is constantly engaging with. So their beliefs and their feelings will then change as well, their feelings about themselves. They know, and you said this, alluded to this a little bit earlier, there is an impact on esteem and body image. When you're looking at this content all the time, it can't help but invert back on you and cause you to ask questions about yourself. You ask questions about whether, do I look right? Am I normal? For many guys, of course, what was always an obsession with penis size at adolescence now goes through the roof. Do I not only have to look like that, but do I have to act like that as well? And so invariably this intersects with the second arena of harms, which I'll get to in a minute, which is how it impacts the people around the porn user. But when you're insecure about yourself and your body image, it does create and heighten depression and anxiety, as well as hypersexual thinking. And so people seek out the experiences. They begin to normalize those experiences that they see there and expect that in their real relationships. So we see rises in what we once might have regarded as deviant sexual behaviors, which are now regarded as normal. Anything from anal sex to choking and slapping and basically actions which against, say, in a heterosexual context, against girls would be painful and uncomfortable and often traumatic, are framed in a way that that's normal and expected, and I should pursue that. And somehow, if I don't do it like that, I'm deficient. So I go around to schools and I educate a lot of young kids on pornography, and I engage with them, and I get a lot of feedback. And I see by mid-high school there is a higher rate of sexual engagement with kids. And when we talk, especially to the females, they report back over and over again these pretty traumatic, aggressive sexual experiences with their boyfriends. And many of them have had to experience sexual behaviors which, straight from the porn playbook, which not only traumatic to them, but that often before they've even had their first kiss, right? So it's like, it's just transformed feelings into behaviors. And just a little broader, just the culture around the cohorts of young people, particularly young guys at high school today across Australia, and I'm pretty sure across most Western countries where porn is accessible, we see this spike in just baseline sexualized behaviors in their communications with each other, their communications with the other sex, with the girls at school, the girls on the bus, those around them, those online, and even with the staff, particularly the female staff at their schools. We see more sexualized behaviors. So these things are impacting the user. And add to that, you alluded to this before, there are other costs to people who are highly addicted to a behavior like porn addiction. It affects their attention, it affects their memory, it affects their capacity to delay gratification and show self-control, and that flows on to so many other aspects. They have a reduced ability to concentrate, to study, to pursue other interesting hobbies or ventures or pursuits, including things like sport and music and other things. And so this will have a long-term effect on them as well, become quite singular. And there's a neurological reason for this. As you get hypersensitive to a certain behavior, and it becomes, over time, you get desensitized to it as well. You end up becoming quite single-minded. You create new neural pathways which divert all your passions and your interests and your priorities to the point that you become a hermit in that world of whatever that behavior is. And so that's just how it harms the user. Then I said there's the people around them. It's the people they're in relationships with. So relationships are impacted. We know from so many studies, secular studies across the world, that where there is a relationship where one or two of the users are engaging regularly with pornography, they report lower satisfaction in their sex life. They report lower levels of trust. They report lower levels of satisfaction in the relationship in terms of intimacy and romance. And we see heightened levels of acting out and seeking alternative relationships because of that level of dissatisfaction. It brings in unrealistic expectations. And so, I often frame it this way when, particularly I'm talking to teenage boys who are, maybe they've been looking at porn 3, 4, 5 years, and they're only 15 when I'm talking to them. And they, in their heads, have had countless sexual experiences. I mean, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of sexual experiences, but they've never held the hand of a girl. They've never kissed a girl, but they are in their heads thinking, I can't wait for the day to happen. And I know that many of them think that they're upskilling, they're investing, they're training for the day, right? And they're training for the day, but when the day comes, it ends up being an absolute unmitigated disaster for them, because the other person knows very quickly, particularly if we're talking about females, who their baseline emotional intelligence is just way ahead of most of us guys. They will know almost at microscopic speeds. They will know that it's not them that's turning you on, but something that's going on in your imagination. And that's deflating for them. That's crushing for their esteem. It doesn't bode well for a open and honest and trusting and exclusive relationship. And so people are actually training for a disastrous relationship in the future when they are training with porn.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Just
and
on that
I
note,
guess, yeah,
you might have heard this quote, but it's something I love the analogy. I saw this quote once that said, "Trying to learn about sex by watching porn is like trying to learn how to drive a car by watching The Fast and the Furious."
that's it, right? Or, okay, that's right. I mean, it's armchair expertise, and the kids are not prepared for the reality of a real bodily and relational sexual experience. And yeah, there's a lot
That
of work being
there's so
done in this
much
space.
there's so much to intimacy that is not addressed in porn, in terms of communication and just the gentler side of intimacy and what it means to really be present with another human being and to be curious about their emotional experience. That in porn, it's just a hardcore straight away from 0 to 100.
Yeah. And there's no concept of foreplay. It's over with 5 to 8 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I hope there's part of the complete
Or consent
unreality
even.
of
I mean, this is one thing I've talked
consent.
about a lot, that you will never see in a porn video, you will never see a girl being asked for consent and her saying no and that wish being respected. You wouldn't ever see that, because then it wouldn't be porn. And so what is this teaching to young boys? It's teaching them that whenever I make an advance, a girl will say yes.
It's interesting. There was an article about a month ago in one of our mainstream News Corp newspapers that was profiling an Australian OnlyFans porn performer who had made it on the global stage. I'm not going to bother saying his name. I don't want to incite people to check him out. But anyway, the article's main theme was this guy is different because girls love him because in the porn clips that he uses, he asked for consent. And so I thought, this is interesting. So me and a couple of my research team decided to have a look at some of his clips, and basically there were a couple of samples where he said, "Would you be okay if we did this?" And they always said yes, right? And then what came after that was a classic, almost carbon copy of every other modern gonzo porn clip with all the same behaviors, including grabbing them by the neck and choking them, cream pieing them without any consent, and a bit of slapping and spitting in their faces. This guy was no model for consent. It was the same stuff, but it was glorified at the media level because some people said he was patient enough. It was basically manufactured consent. And yeah, you're right. So this stuff doesn't teach anyone how to actually put another person's needs and interests before their own. It's very selfish. And I guess this flows on to the third dimension. If porn harms the individual and porn harms the relationship, this flows onto society. Society is deeply harmed. We know this is deeply. We have a hypersexual society, and notwithstanding, as I've already said, there are people in the industry who are harmed. Right? It is an industry where, statistically speaking, whenever you look at a porn clip, even if the porn performer, who's a well-known person who's making millions and says that consent, you never know if they've truly consented. You never know. You don't know what sort of coercion's happening behind the camera, what sort of stress or manipulation they're under. But when we do surveys of those who have left the porn industry, they almost exclusively and unanimously say that it was an abusive process, where they were lied to persistently, where they had money withheld, there were threats, and in the end, they can never escape it. And if they want to, there's no mechanism to leave the past behind because it's secured always online. They're enslaved to it. And I think the average life expectancy of a porn performer, when I say life expectancy, their time as a performer in the industry is about 3 months. But 3 months is a very short window of their lives, and yet it's there forever. So it's pretty hard on those people, and I think we need to do some more work to be transparent about that and understand the depths of that abuse. But that just flows on to behaviors in society, which, as I've alluded before, flow onto the way people interact with each other in society, and particularly at the micro level in the schools, in the online communities. And so girls, of course, are constantly pressured to be more sexual just to be affirmed and to find their place. They're told that you aren't worthy unless you look a certain way and you act a certain way. Nothing about their inner attributes, nothing about their intelligence, nothing about their character. That's irrelevant, and that's at a societal level. And guys are increasingly given the expectation that they can take what they want. They don't have to earn someone's respect. They are entitled to people's, they're entitled to pleasure at someone else's begging. And so it's really, I don't know, harmful that in the end affects those who at least able to make a difference in society and these expectations. That again is the young females. The females are the ones who cop the raw end of the stick from this hypersexualized culture. And of course it flows on to mass media as well. That's more sexual. Our Netflix shows and other streaming TV shows and movies are more pornified in the way they express sex, which of course just makes these distorted views of relationships and sex that we have already created by porn sort of generalized. And it's just a mess, I think. So I think there are so many reasons we can say porn is harmful, but there's not many ways we can say, and this is from the peer review literature, to show that pornography is positive for society. It has no educative benefit because it distorts how sex works. It has no power at bonding and helping and strengthening relationships. It has no answer for the sexualization of girls that is created from a pornified culture. It's not good for young people. It's not good for their capacity to function academically or across different disciplines because people get more and more hooked into their single-minded thinking because they're compulsive. So, it's paralyzing society, I think, in a sense. And I'm sure many of your viewers will know and feel that paralysis in their own lives as they're really now trying to just get a grip on self-control and get a grip on sound thinking and trying to view others around them in a sensible and a kind way, but this thing keeps pulling them back and they keep fighting without realizing that they're re-engaging with the behavior and it's so powerful, it's got a grip on them. And so, I think when you've got anything in society that is so influential and controlling over people in that way, you just know it sniffs bad and it's the litmus test says this is not good.
Yeah, it's a prison that many people find themselves in and they don't know how to get themselves out. I'd love to shift the conversation over to that now, to recovery. And, if someone is listening to this and let's say they have made the decision within themselves that this thing is harming their life and they want to break free from it. I know you've done a lot of research into science-based interventions, what really works. So I'm curious, what does work in recovery?
I think it's really important to say right from the bat when you're talking about recovery that there's no single silver bullet to this. There's no pill for recovery, and there's no one step that will. It's a process. People need a process, and everyone who's coming to the process comes with a slightly different backstory and a slightly different challenge before them. The age that you started looking at pornography, the frequency that you masturbated, the nature of the content that you looked at, that all will impact on the degree of and the depth of the compulsion, let alone things like your genetic makeup, your family background, what's going on in your life, and so forth. These things are all going to be slightly different people, but there are some aspects I think everyone can apply, and that they will be effective, particularly if you stick at a process. I think one of the things we need to get back to is realize that this behavior has impacted the brain. And so that's an area that we can really tackle well. We know that the brain is plastic. It changes. And it changes by what you feed it. It will respond to dopamine. Its dopaminergic activities will impacted. The brain will recognize that when you keep feeding it a certain rewarding behavior, it will start to align itself by creating new neural pathways and to want to revisit those behaviors. And so, over time, I've developed in my brain a habit that says whenever I'm tired or when I'm stressed or whenever I'm bored or whenever I've got a trigger, I want to go to this behavior, which is porn. Well, the first thing I need to do is I need to starve myself of that behavior. I got to work really hard at preventing myself from accessing it, because every time I reward my brain with more dopamine, I basically reinforce those neural pathways that are there. Now, we do know that the brain synaptically prunes throughout life. If you neglect something long enough, it will start to break away and become less and less prominent in your brain until eventually it will have no sort of drive over you at all. An example that I tell people is me and my passion for golf. As a teenager, I wanted to be a professional golfer. I was never that good, but I still had this aspiration, and I practiced and I looked forward to playing golf, and it was something that really drove me. I always got excited about playing golf. And the nights before I had a game, I couldn't sleep, and it was sort of like just consume me. And I'd buy golfing magazines and I'd follow all the stuff. In my 30s, I developed back problems to the point I needed surgery, and then I couldn't finish a game of golf without pain, and so I stopped playing golf. And so my golf clubs, they basically just gathered dust in the garage. And 15 years it had been since I'd had a decent game of golf. I'm 50 now, and I really struggle to finish a round still. So you mentioned golf to me now, and I don't care. I'm utterly, it's like blank to me. I'm indifferent. Why am I indifferent? Because my brain has just synaptically pruned away all those interesting pathways that gave me pleasure from it in the past. It's not where I get my pleasure from anymore. And so if you neglect something like porn long enough, it will start to crumble and fall away. Now, there are guideline estimates about how much time you need. These are not backed by any concrete science because the studies have not been done. But ballpark ideas are it would take you about 30 days just to lose cravings for the behavior. It would take you maybe 2 months to establish a new behavior. And this is what you need to do when you're saying no to a behavior that you're escaping. You just don't want to stop it. It's like saying, well, I'm just going to dig a hole out of my brain and say, what happens when I'm tired and bored and lonely next time? Either I'm going to stumble back in the hole, or it's going to very quickly be filled with something which is just like it, which is why people who struggle with a certain behavior addiction often very quickly find themselves doing other supernormal stimuli behaviors like computer gaming or overeating or some sort of thing that gives instant pleasure. So what you want to do is you want to fill that hole with something which is meaningful, which is pleasurable, but is something that you've got to put time and effort into. We call it an earned dopamine activity, whereas porn is an example of a cheap dopamine activity. And that's something which you're going to have to invest in. And it's quite an exciting and fun part of life. It gives you a license to get a hobby or a few hobbies and to throw yourselves into them. And over time, your brain will start to think, well, when I am tired, when I'm bored, when I'm stressed, whenever I do need to get some sort of compensation, I will go to the new thing. And so the new thing could be anything from exercise to reading, to learning an instrument, to having a hobby, to socializing with people. The list goes on. And I myself have lots of hobbies because I have quite a tendency to behavioral addictions. I have porn in my background. I have computer gaming in my background. I'm 50 and I'm trying to be responsible and set a model for my children, but I have these pulls to these things. So I put in my place practices which really limit my capacity to revisit the negative behavior while at the same time investing in new ones. So that's just a pattern of neurology, and your brain will change and adapt. And because it's plastic, and over time, you will see the fruit from that. And I know many dozens of people in my own experience who have been able to successfully say goodbye to porn addiction from just practicing these things. So that's the first thing. I just say a couple of other things in terms of the process. It's really hard to change on your own, and it's really helpful to have community around you. Now, I would advise people, if they can, to get to some sort of support group, because support groups give you not only an environment of others who can hear your story, but that goes back to others, people who get you. So that might be anything from a 12-step side of kind of concept or another recovery program type concept. There's many different models out there. And I think the bottom line is, if you're journeying with other people and you're regularly sharing and being transparent with people, that is just powerful. It sort of is exponential, the support in terms of motivating you and keeping your will going, because you're going to need will. You can't control every variable in your life. There will be times when you feel really low. There will be temptations that come left field and you weren't expecting. You need to have resilience at those times, and other people will help give you that. So the community is important. I also think people need to be aware. They need to have an education or a knowledge of just the scope and degree of harm and damage that's happening with pornography, both to themselves as well as to those around us, including societally. I think the more information we have, not only does it heighten how bad this content and this behavior is, but it also will again give you motivation to want to stay away from it and to change. And it will show you the different areas where you might be susceptible to it. It also might give you further ideas about how you can turn your private conviction of change into something that's beneficial to others. So if there are activists out there who are working to combat the porn industry, you can support them. If there are people in your local community where you see there is a dubious influence of pornography in it, but maybe the way the boys speak, maybe the way families fail to monitor their own children, you can have a word in there and sort of act locally to sort of increase and enhance a corporate response. So I think that's helpful. Get upskilled in your knowledge and look at ways to be able to apply that knowledge outwardly from yourself. And I guess the last thing I think you really do need is you need a conviction. You need to not only want to change, but you need to want to change to be something better. And you want to just keep forming what that better version of yourself, a better version of society around you, a better relationship with your intimate partner, a better relationship for your children. You want to have a goal which is worthy and gives aspiration. Does that make sense? Because I think when you're driven by something outside of yourself and it's a noble and worthy cause, that is, I think, just very powerful, and it will help again sustain your short-term change and your long-term management. And I guess management is important. I think long-term, you do need to make sure you set up good structures around your private life and your family life that, again, minimize bad behaviors, reward and encourage good behaviors. I mean, just habits and choices. And over time, added together, all those aspects create a process which does see real change that is lasting. And I think people shouldn't despair if they fall off the apple cart periodically or occasionally and think, well, that was just stupid. No, processes take time. And if you took like 6, 8, 10, 12, for some people, 15, 20, some people 50 years of their life they've invested in this. I deal with people in their 60s and 70s who are porn addicts. And they might think, well, yeah, I can never escape this. Well, you've invested a lot of time in the way that you think and act and respond to triggers and sexual content. Go easy on yourself. Don't expect it to be a lightning bolt change overnight, right? You give yourself time to undo that and let the brain establish new patterns, but it can be done. So be patient, keep trying. The moment that if you do happen to fail on your convictions and repeated behavior you said you don't want to do, well, don't give up, but just tell someone about it and then just resolve to keep pushing forward, trust the processes that you've put in place, and eventually you'll find that you are able to master those temptations and able to be resilient.
I think that last one you brought in is so important, that idea that you need to have a conviction, you need to have a dream that you're fighting for. And it's something that I teach the guys in my program as well, this connecting with a compelling vision of the future that's greater than where you are now. It's so much easier to fight for something, something that you want to run towards rather than something that you're running away from. If you're only fueled by hate and aversion and I don't like this part of myself, it's going to be a much harder journey than saying, this is who I want to be. This is the type of man I want to be. This is how I want to show up in the world. This is my purpose, my mission. It's a much healthier fuel to run off of.
Well, shame is paralyzing. And if someone finds that they've gone against their conscience too many times because they keep repeating the failures, that could become so debilitating, and psychologically it can be devastating on people. And that's what happens if you're only escaping something bad. You need to be pursuing something good and something something greater than, more aspirational than where you're at now.
Great, man. Well, that's a great place to end. Last question for you. If someone is listening to this, and they're in the depths of this addiction and just really struggling, and they feel like they keep trying, but they're not seeing any progress, are there any final words you'd want to leave for someone in that position?
Sure. You're not alone in those feelings at all. In fact, your feelings are far more common than you realize. It's just that because you are functioning alone, that you feel you're alone. And so don't despair that somehow this is a problem which no one else can understand and no one else has experienced. There are many out there, and the sooner you can make contact with others on the same pathway, the sooner you'll get a release and relief with that knowledge that not only you're not alone, but there are others who are trying to battle as well. And again, let me just echo what I said before. These processes can take time, but they will work if you put time into it. So wherever you're at, draw a line and say, well, as of this moment, I'm now going to start pushing forward. I'm going to make efforts to cut off that influence that's negative, and I'm going to start investing in good stuff. And I'm going to talk to some others about it, and I'm going to get into a community that I can share this with, and I'm just going to push forward. And I think you'll be surprised at how quickly you can have effective change.
Where can people find out more about your work? Where should they get connected?
Sure. Look, I have two websites. One is a website for my school-based publishing and consultancy business. It's called DigiHelp.io. DigiHelp, DigiHelp.io. And that's for anyone in the primary and high school space who want to have some education solutions for their schools. The other thing is a faith-based recovery program that I've produced called Resist, and they can find that at resistprogram.org. So it's a Christian-based one. There's quite a few other Christian-based programs out there, and many of them are excellent. What makes mine different is it's a 5-week only program. It's quite short, it's punchy, it's fast, and it's really getting people into the process of change as quick as possible. So you can check those out, and you can contact me through them, and I'm very happy to talk with people.
Amazing. Well, we'll definitely link all of those in the show notes below. So, man, it's been wonderful having you on as a guest today. Really insightful stuff, and glad we got to bring you on here. So that's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Unhooked. We'll see you guys on the next episode.